Love, jealousy, and hatred are emotions as old as humanity itself. Perfectly ordinary until they spiral out of control. When pushed to the edge, these feelings can ignite tragedy so devastating they leave no way back. When love stops being a source of growth and turns into a haunting obsession, the consequences can be unbearable. Today's case is a chilling example of just how far those consequences can stretch. Join me as we unravel a story that begins with shocking discovery and ends in a courtroom, revealing the dark depths of human emotion. On a crisp spring morning in the rural outskirts of Willow Creek, Oregon, a local farmer named Henry Dawson was tending to his canola fields. Known for its sprawling golden landscapes, Willow Creek is a quiet farming community where the canola blooms draw visitors every spring. Henry, a man who'd worked the land for decades, owned a modest plot on the edge of town, surrounded by dense trees that kept it isolated from prying eyes. 3 days earlier, everything had seemed normal when he last checked his fields. But this time, as he walked the rows, he spotted something odd, a large mound of earth protruding beneath a thick cluster of bushes, just 13 feet from his crops. The sight puzzled him. The ground here had always been flat, undisturbed. With years of farming under his belt, Henry knew this wasn't the work of an animal. Too big for a burrow, too irregular for a termite mound. As he approached, he noticed the soil was loose, freshly turned, not yet hardened by rain or wind. A creeping unease took hold. Grabbing his shovel, he decided to dig. A few inches down, his blade struck something soft. Then, a human finger emerged from the dirt. Stumbling back in horror, his heart pounding, Henry dropped the shovel, took a deep breath to steady himself, and bolted back to town to alert the authorities. Within hours, the Willow Creek police arrived, cordoning off the area. Investigators and forensic experts swarmed the scene, carefully excavating the mound. The soil told a story of its own, darker and wetter than the surrounding earth, recently disturbed. Some patches were compacted, others loose, suggesting a rushed burial. No plants had taken root atop it, and sharp, linear marks, likely from a shovel, crisscrossed the surface. Digging deeper, at about 16 inches, they uncovered a body. First, a right arm appeared, then the back, and finally the entire corpse, a woman, face down, naked, and in an advanced state of decay. The team worked meticulously, using small trowels to preserve evidence. Once fully unearthed, the body was examined on site. She was an adult female, her skin blackened and tissues heavily decomposed, making identification a challenge. No ID, no personal items, just the body itself. Initial checks revealed no obvious wounds, no cuts, bruises, or signs of a struggle. The corpse was sealed in a forensic bag and sent for a detailed autopsy, while police scoured the scene for more clues. Expanding their search, investigators found something 65 feet away, deep, parallel ruts in the soil, consistent with tire tracks. The impressions were clear, suggesting a heavy vehicle had lingered there before driving off. No distinct footprints were nearby, adding to the mystery. Photos were taken, measurements recorded, and the tracks became a critical lead. The police theorized the body had been transported by car, dumped in the dead of night when the fields were deserted, then hastily buried in a shallow grave. Back at the station, the team pieced together a timeline. The killer had likely driven to this remote spot, chosen for its seclusion, dug a quick hole, and covered the body before fleeing. The tire marks were their best shot at tracing the vehicle. Samples were collected for analysis, and a search began for missing persons reports that might match the victim. Though the trail was thin, the investigators were determined to crack the case. At the morgue, forensic experts got to work. The body belonged to an adult woman, about 5 feet 3 inches tall, weighing roughly 120 pounds before death. Based on bone structure, tooth wear, and skin elasticity, or what remained of it, they estimated her age between 30 and 34. Her joints showed no major degeneration, and her teeth had moderate wear, typical of someone in their early 30s. The skin was grayish-green, mottled with purple patches from pooling blood, and her abdomen was bloated with gas, a sign of advanced decomposition. The outer layers peeled away in chunks, especially around the torso and limbs, and the joints had stiffened and slackened as decay set in. A sticky fluid oozed from the corpse, pooling in low areas due to gravity, and the bloating suggested she'd been kept in a confined, warm space before burial. Few insects were present, mostly clustered in natural openings like the eyes and mouth. Not deep inside, a clue she hadn't been underground long. The damp soil clung lightly to her skin, not fused, indicating she'd been buried for no more than 7 to 8 hours before discovery. Yet the extent of decay pointed to a longer timeline. The team concluded she died about 10 days earlier, kept in a sealed environment, possibly a car trunk, where he'd accelerated the process, then buried just before Henry found her. Examining her organs, they noted her liver was unusually dark with microscopic damage, and her stomach lining showed tiny hemorrhages, hallmarks of poisoning. The intestines had similar subtle injuries. Suspecting toxicity, they tested samples from her liver, kidneys, and stomach fluid. The results confirmed cyanide, a lethal poison that blocks oxygen at the cellular level, killing within minutes. Symptoms include seizures, respiratory failure, and unconsciousness, and the levels in her system were far beyond fatal. This was no accident. It was murder. One question lingered. Had she been assaulted? With no clothes on the body, sexual violence was a possibility. But the vaginal exam found no semen or clear trauma, though 10 days of decay muddied the evidence. Without definitive proof, they couldn't rule it out but had to rely on other clues. The final report painted a grim picture. She'd been poisoned with cyanide around 10 days prior, hidden in a warm, enclosed space as her body broke down, then buried mere hours before discovery. The police now had a method, poisoning in a window of time. They scoured missing persons files, focusing on women in their early 30s, around 5 feet 3 inches and 120 pounds. After sifting through dozens of cases, they narrowed it down to 3 possibilities. DNA from the victim's bones and teeth was compared to family samples, and a match emerged. Laura Bennett, 32, from Portland, Oregon. Her husband, James Carter, 37, reported her missing after she'd gone to visit a friend in Willow Creek. Contact was lost days later, and the family had no leads until now. With an identity, the investigation kicked into high gear. Laura's life came under scrutiny, her relationships, job, and potential enemies. Records showed she'd checked into the Pinewood Inn in Willow Creek shortly before vanishing. Security footage from the inn captured her at 8 p.m., wearing glasses and a black dress, looking relaxed as she approached the front desk. Moments later, a man in a white t-shirt joined her, and they checked in together. Their body language was telling. He wrapped an arm around her waist, and they shared kisses, oblivious to the staff. They headed to their room, caught clearly on hallway cameras. Laura's registration was straightforward, but the man used no ID, complicating efforts to identify him. Digging deeper, police interviewed her friends and co-workers at her Portland import-export firm. A breakthrough came when they recognized a man as Michael Reed, a colleague from a different department. Whispers among staff revealed a secret. Laura and Michael were having an affair. She'd taken 3 days off, claiming a family trip, while Michael requested leave to visit relatives. No one at work suspected a thing. They rarely interacted publicly. Suspicion fell on Michael. Had he killed her? Police tracked him down for questioning, visibly nervous. He admitted to the affair and their secret getaway at the Pinewood Inn. They planned a discreet escape, but Michael ran into old friends while sightseeing in Willow Creek, leading to an impromptu meetup. He claimed he left the hotel around 11 a.m. to see them, returning at 5 p.m. During that window, he couldn't reach Laura but assumed she was resting. He'd left her behind to avoid exposing their affair. At 5:13 p.m., he got a text from her saying she had to leave early. Her husband might have found out, and not to call. Oddly, her belongings, purse, wallet, everything but her phone, remained in the room. Michael figured she'd left in a hurry. He stayed overnight, gathered her things the next morning, and returned to Portland, intending to return them later. Back at work, he avoided contacting her, fearing exposure. Days passed, and when she didn't show up, he grew uneasy. A co-worker mentioned her disappearance, and when police arrived, he learned she'd been murdered. Shocked, he insisted he was innocent. Camera footage backed the story. At 11 a.m., he and Laura returned to the hotel. He left her in the room and was gone until 5:30 p.m. Tapes from a cafe and diner confirmed. He was with friends from 11:30 a.m. to 4:45 p.m. The next morning, he checked out at 8 a.m., her belongings in tow, and drove straight to Portland. His alibi held. He couldn't have killed her, but the hotel cameras revealed more. At 3:14 p.m., Laura left her room in white silk pajamas, phone in hand, heading toward the elevator. Strangely, the elevator camera didn't catch her, and she vanished from all recordings after that. Investigating further, police found a blind spot near the elevator, a room not covered by hallway or elevator cameras. Records showed it was rented by James Carter, Laura's husband. His presence at the exact time she disappeared raised red flags. Had he known about the affair? The room offered no immediate clues. Over 10 days had passed, and daily cleaning erased any traces. The maid recalled it being spotless when James checked out, almost too perfect. Suspicion deepened. Had he scrubbed the scene? Cameras showed him tailing Laura and Michael from the moment they arrived, snapping photos from afar. At 5:37 p.m., he returned with a large black suitcase, leaving at 9 p.m. with it in tow. Tire tracks near the burial site matched a 2008 Ford pickup he'd bought months earlier. His job as a lab researcher studying agricultural fertilizers gave him access to cyanide, a chilling link to the autopsy findings. Traffic cameras tracked his truck from Portland to Willow Creek and back. Then again 10 days later, aligning with the burial timeline. Police theorized he'd followed Laura, poisoned her, stashed her body in the suitcase, and dumped it later when decay became unbearable. They surveilled him discreetly, gathering evidence. A search of his Portland home uncovered the truck, reeking faintly of rot, with dried fluid in the bed matching Laura's DNA. The black suitcase, scrubbed clean, still held traces of decomposition under UV light and protein tests. Confronted, James crumbled. He'd loved Laura deeply, but her betrayal shattered him. Finding intimate photos on her phone, he tracked her to Willow Creek, stole cyanide from his lab, and planned her death. Spotting her outside the room, he lured her inside, forced her to confess, and gave her a spiked drink. As she convulsed, he stripped her bare, watching her die in agony, a twisted punishment. Using her phone, he texted Michael to throw off suspicion, then smashed it and ditched it far from the hotel. He stuffed her into a suitcase bought that day, cleaned the room, and drove home. For 10 days, he kept her in the truck's bed, but the stench forced him back to Willow Creek. He buried her in the canola field, a place tied to her infidelity, hoping Michael would take the fall. His plan unraveled with the fluid leaks and forensic traces. Charged with premeditated murder, James faced trial. His defense claimed emotional distress, but the prosecution highlighted his calculated moves. The court agreed his actions were deliberate, his cover-up cunning. Sentenced to death under U.S. law, with a hefty fine to Laura's family. His appeals failed. The gavel fell, closing a case born from love turned lethal. In the end, James Carter didn't just kill his wife. He destroyed himself. A tale of passion and vengeance ended in a grave and a cell, leaving two families broken. This is where the story stops, a stark reminder of what happens when jealousy consumes all reason.